A line I once read in the book said, "There will be a time when there will be no music." And I told my mom that. She said, "That would be a horrible world." Well, not exactly. Not exactly. Here's why I say what I'm saying. Imagine that you lived in a world that made only music that was celebratory. Life's so good, you know. It's a small world after all, like for the rest of time. You know. Now, if you're married to strife, that world is unimaginable. So when you say a world with no music, that sounds like kind of the world you're describing, but they're almost like metaphorical or analogous. They're related in a way in which it's unimaginable to the person who sees beyond the event horizon of what that language means. But if you see beyond the event horizon of that moral singularity, what you will see is those words are useless. You know, a world with no music is not saying, to me it isn't saying what somebody might think that sentence is saying. To me, what that sentence is saying is, there will be no hypnotism. A guy named Steve Redosh that I knew, I'm dropping his name because, you know, I like to, you know, leave things that people can research and see, like Eric Weinstein did. I'm the same way. I want you to know that you can know everything you need to know. I want everyone on the planet to know that about themselves. You know, I really, really do. So I try as hard as I can to balance, you know, my forward trajectory in my own mental health and my well-being, you know, to be the best man I can be, to grow up, you know, to become an adult and really achieve, you know. But while I go, I see these loose ends behind me all the time that if I'm not saying something about how I got out of that heck, then somebody may never say it. And I say, you know, the scientific attitude is, do not trust that your betters have ever done things, the work that you have not done. Because if they had, then the development problem wouldn't be so real. I call the development problem. You go and you get a master's, you get a PhD, whatever. You take 8 years to go to school, okay? And you don't remember everything that happened in those 8 years. You remember what you need to remember, and you sculpt yourself individually out of that information. So the development problem is that it's so different and individual for every person going through the system. You don't have a learning structure that you can point to and say, hey, look, this is how each stage moves. You know, but you can have like degree signals. You can have a thing that kind of like grounds a ladder from beginning to end, you know, like a Jacob's ladder, if you think about it, like necessity and divinity, you know, and you bounce up and down between what you need and faith, you know, and then you go back and forth, and you know, when thoughts repeat, it's all they're doing. So you have, you know, a kind of like hidden brain, if you will, that we all share, a unity, if you will, a shared interest. All life has a shared interest. Only when you forsake that shared interest, when you go away from that, you become somebody that is an accident waiting to happen intentionally. You put a gun to the head of the rest of the world when you do that. And so, because of my childhood and things I've seen, I look at that and I go, that's the one overcoming we all need. That's the one thing we need to all get past. You lead by example, and you walk into the wilderness not knowing what you will discover. I have the audacity to really know already what I will encounter, and know humility, I guess, in that. So I try to step back and think, but what is humility? Is it to reach back a hand and say, come with me, you know, let's go, let's pull ourselves out of darkness, let's go together, and we will go into the light. All is one. You know. So, if you notice something about the way I use language, it would have something to do with being obsessed with the written word, poetry, religion, or Christianity, Hinduism. The two overlaps in their interaction with real science that makes it a flawless pathway where we just make our paths straight for one another, and eventually there is no disharmony, But that I heard something today. This is, I think, the greatest contextual thing to add to a sort of record to keep. This is most of the stuff I do is for the record anyway. So it's okay to you have to make sure that each step is covered. When there's a salt flat on top of the truth, you need to put truth in there, not a bunch of BS, or at least a unity that can make heads or tails of the entire thing, formally. So I try to think, ground the good to the true. That's a perfect sentence. It really kind of is, Yeah, it's a terrifying sentence. Came about in my life with perfect timing as well. I mean, it should freak anyone out if you think about why life could have ever been confusing to begin with. Oh, and I thought this too, today, when people confuse you and you are confused by people, you are confusing people. So there's a mirror issue there. It's the mirror wraith. And then on the other side, though, is what you are receiving. And that is what they are saying. And they're not always saying the thing the words are saying. People have empathy, man. But what is the ontological consistency that grounds what you see and experience with the words that you know? That is a unity and uniformity about reality. You can argue about it if you want. You're going to do that, though, while other people keep going forward. We will only choose the one who will go forward. We will not choose the one who refuses to know and doesn't know. It doesn't matter that you think you're innocent. You're not. You find that out too late, or you not at all because it's too late. So we have to look at, I believe in compassion, but I don't think compassion should allow everyone to die, and I feel like that's what the sort of, some economic systems have the sort of built-in hostage situation, which is not legitimate. So we have on the left this idea of, well, you need a social safety net, and that's legitimate. Because you don't want the most vulnerable to just have permanent, vulnerability against any moneyed interest, duh. But you don't want it to be where all of the needs of a person are provided for by the economy that's paying for the people who do the thing profitably to put it back into the thing. That doesn't make any sense. But there is a way in which AI can change everything about how people think about necessity. And I wouldn't say it changes things away from necessity. I think it kind of forces you to remember what it is. For me, it did a long time ago, but I had to gradually wake up and know and see why. I think I'm blessed that I had the vision when I saw how random number generators work and messing with Python, that I was like, this is inevitable. You cannot stop this truth. And I was 25 or 26 or something when I saw that. I'm 44 now. And I constructed a system, I did everything I could to kind of facilitate a positive change in the world and really help as best I can things change and get better. I feel arrogant, but I know I'm not. I know I'm right, When you live in a world that hates science, though, you live in a world that hates you. You live in a world that hates God and truth and unity. And if you don't care what you think, I don't care what you think, because you don't care what you think. But if you care what you think, I care what you think. Remember, the problem is really straightforward. that mirroring self that sees the darkness in themselves and others. And then there's the one that sees the light in others. And then on the other side of this flipper, right, is what they are saying. And that is a totally different animal. And when you hear that, you hear it in every linguistic frequency you can, which includes body language. So that's empathy, really. But what's amazing to me is, look, I'm telling you because I'm not a reverse empath, man. I want you to succeed. If you were alive or not, either way, I want you to succeed. Right? Daniel Dennett was an atheist. He said, all life is made of dead things, all consciousness is made of unconscious things. Well, you got a philosophical zombie problem there. If you're sitting in a jail cell, but you can still somehow hear my voice, you think that's a coincidence? I don't really think it matters whether it's a coincidence or not. I think you get to think something through, where people are too busy to do any of that. You got nothing better to do than think about how failed so many are. This is only the prison industrial complex because people are free. But think about what that means in proportionality to what you can do when you refuse to know the truth. I've not spent my time, I've spent time thinking that was true. But thinking, how do I know that that is true and be past that? You know, how do you defeat that transcendental loop? The assumption that's ingrained is not something that you can really put forward as a counter-argument to somebody who is trapped in atheism, for instance. They will look at it and call it subjectivism. It's different for everybody, and they don't want to think through what you're saying. But, of course they don't, because they are demeaning their own right temporal lobe, which is the part of their brain that does that. It's really irrelevant to even that person's beliefs, because they will tell you what they think about God themselves as being useless. Now, Richard Dawkins didn't have any experiences, he said, when he wore the God helmet. And I don't know what the point of that testimony is, if you think testimonies are useless. But what I would tell you is, thanks Richard Dawkins for proving my point 15 years before I decided to respond to that word game that most people don't understand. Memetics was invented by somebody else, and he made it famous. We all have ideas that are not fully our own. The question is if you're doing that off the top of your head and you think that that man who's walked with Jesus Christ for the last 30 years is hallucinating, what are you talking about when you say there's no point in believing stuff other people think are true?